This is Bill Gandy. How you doing with the Allegheny City Historic Gallery, and I'm here with Carol Peterson, writer, architectural expert on how do we explain this on your specialty?
I'm an architectural historian. I research and document the history of old houses, old buildings, communities, how they all tie together, what their context is that makes them interesting and relevant to us in the 21st century.
Okay, so she's a vast knowledge of information. So much a vast knowledge that Mr. Rooney contacted her to write a book, co-author a book with him called Allegheny City, and it's all about old Allegheny City and things like that. So I think we got an A+ expert on our hand right now. So we're going to do some walking and some talking and look at a couple structures, okay? About this building. We're standing right here in front of this old structure. About how old is this building?
This building is from right about 1900, and its style is kind of classical revival, as you see in these rusticated stone blocks. My understanding is that the building was designed by Frederick Osterling, Northside architect who lived up California Avenue, grew up partly in Manchester,
okay.
And he designed the Union Trust building downtown. He designed some nicer houses on the north side and that odd little studio building down on Isabella Street. And Clayton for Henry Clay Frick, and some other significant buildings around Pittsburgh.
So he was a major shaper of Allegheny City also.
He was, well, there were a lot of good architects who worked in Allegheny City. He was pretty well known. Oh, he designed, I think, Allegheny High School and some houses in Manchester. He was an interesting architect. A friend of mine is working on a book on him. I'm not sure when it will come out, but it's going to be a good one when it does. Yeah, I mean, look at the scale of the front door surround. I mean, you just don't see anybody building anything anywhere near like this anymore.
Tell me about what we're looking at right here at the end of the street. Looks like a pretty old church structure.
That's a historically African-American church up there.
Okay.
And it's neat to me in that it was built by an African-American congregation. I think it's from around 1900, 1905, right, about like that. And just to think of the dedication and sacrifice that the church members made to build that. It's lovely. It's stone, it's got stained glass, it's got a steeple with a slate roof.
So to my understanding, there was a major multicultural contribution to the building of Allegheny City. When I look at a lot of the old pictures, I'm even surprised to see that there's black men in 1907 sitting next to the library with suits on and everything, you know, helping to supervise and things like that. So was it always that way according to the history of Allegheny City?
Well, there were always African American people living in different parts of Allegheny City.
Okay.
In the 19th century, there were African American people living a little bit in Manchester,
okay.
not much like it, you know, 20th
like
century,
right.
Yeah, or 21st. But actually, Deutschtown was pretty much had more African American population than any other part of Allegheny City in the 19th century. Also,
I'm shocked.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Mary Shenley, who gave the city Shenley Park.
Yes.
She owned much of the land above East Ohio Street, or actually above Avery Street, and she would lease lots to people who would then, you know, build houses on them rather than having to buy a lot. So
right.
First of all, that was more affordable. Secondly, it was, you know, apparently she did not have, you know, the prejudice that said, you know, many people had then that would say you can't live here or there.
me a little bit about the architecture on Arch Street and what we got happening.
Well, this Arch Street was in existence and had houses along it, I believe before 1850.
Oh.
So it's one of the older streets around here, maybe even before 1840. See that block that says 162 on that
Yes.
building? That is its original street number. So that shows that the building is from before 1899, which is when they changed all the Allegheny City street numbers to have, the 4-digit numbers that we have now. I have not specifically researched this house, but I can tell you, based on its form, its smaller scale, and its building materials being a frame house and just its general lack of ornamentation, that it looks to be one of the older houses on the street. The earliest houses in neighborhoods like this and Southside and Lawrenceville are generally the smallest ones, wood frame houses, and they're just kind of nondescript, but they're still worthy of restoration, preservation, or what have you.
Well, I would have never guessed that this was one of the oldest structures on the street right here. When we look at the brick structures, that's what you start thinking about.
Yeah.
But I guess the original settlers would have been more like farmers and things like that? Or?
No, they would have had like lots, just like, like a 20 by whatever foot lot, and they might have been like a skilled craftsman, a mechanic, maybe a family from here had somebody working in all the cotton mills that they had down closer to the river, working class families. So the style of this is it's a Second Empire style house. What that means is there's that mansard roof, the roof that is it's almost vertical.
Okay.
The other things that are typical of Second Empire and also the contemporaneous Italianate style are those elaborate window hoods that are arched, and they have the incised carving in them, and the front door surround, which is about as fancy as it gets around
That's
here.
a very elaborate house. What type of person would have owned a house like this?
Somebody who maybe owned a small to medium-sized business, manufacturing or retail,
Right.
wholesale, or maybe a doctor or lawyer, someone in that, not wealthy but upper middle class, I guess, if to relate it to words we use today.
Right. So you're an incredible woman. What made Mr. Rooney, /1 guy on the Northside, contact you to co-author a book?
Well, I had done a history of his house, of Mr. and Mrs. Rooney's house over on North Lincoln, way back in about 1993, I think.
Oh, wow.
And so then it got to be like 14 years later, 2007, and he called me and said, "Hey, I want to write a book. Want to write a book with me?" So we did.
Incredible.
That's how it happened. This is actually an older street than the War Streets proper.
Give me an idea. What would have Northside have been a little bit like back then?
Well, there was no railroad yet. Allegheny wasn't even a city until 1840, and the only means of, aside from roads that went over mountains, the only means of interregional travel were canals. So, the canal went right through Allegheny City and then turned left to go into downtown Pittsburgh, and that was kind of like the big deal as far as transportation was concerned.
I see a lot of the old retail buildings, and they look like they have paint on top of the brick. Is that something that they commonly practice, or did that happen during a certain period?
People didn't often paint brick buildings back in the 19th century, but sometimes they did.
Right.
And often they didn't. It depends, for one thing, on the type of brick that was used. I mean, by the late 19th century, people were using, what they called pressed brick. Brick was, made to look better for a facade, and so that would not have been considered in need of painting.
Right.
It's an early 20th century apartment building, it looks like. It's from about the same time as that one we were talking about down the street, but a little bit less fancy. But it still has some really interesting, nice features to it. You know, that the high brick basement, the coins at the corners, those or imitation coins, really, those bits of brick that stick
Yes.
out. The columns with the fancy capitals at the top.
The detail is amazing for
Yeah.
that period. How could they
Yes.
do that with no machinery, or did they have machinery?
They built wooden scaffolding and had good masonry guys, you know.
My goodness.
So yeah, it looks like a really nice building. It might have been originally occupied by middle class people, or kind of like office workers
Right,
and stuff.
right.
There was a growing, I guess you'd call it a clerical
of-
class. I
Oh,
mean, people
interesting.
who worked in offices as stenographers and whatnot, or I mean, who knows who lived there.
All right, this is Bill Gandy, and I'm standing here with the legendary Carol Peterson, and we were just doing a nice tour of the street. And you could check out, make sure you pick up her book, co-authored with Mr. Dan Rooney, called Allegheny City. And where can we find this book most?
You can find it in the different bookstores around. We hardly have bookstores in the city these days, but you could find it at Gallery on 43rd Street in Lawrenceville. Carrie Kennedy over on Western Avenue might still have some. You can find it in Barnes and Noble.
Okay.
And you can also find it on that internet place that I'm not going to name because we should all support local businesses.
Right. And you're also going to find it in the Allegheny City Historic Gallery, which we're going to open this summer. And I hope we can talk you into coming to do a book signing or something of the such.
I'm sure.
Cool.
Mr. Rooney and I love to do book signings.
All right, love it.
That's
So
nice.
we'll have her and Mr. Rooney in the house, and that would be a nice little draw. So